A dark room, dim light illuminating the face of a little girl. The camera clicks, leaving a portrait that her family would have loved to keep forever. Yet anyone who looks into the eyes in that picture feels as if they are being watched. Cold. Strange. It is 1904. A prestigious family, a brightly lit house, and behind that luxurious wall, secrets that will never be spoken. A few months later, the house is in mourning. People whisper that those unfortunate events were foretold, hidden deep in the girl's forced smile in the picture. Tonight, we will follow the trail to see what really lies behind that smile. A studio photo taken in 1904 at first glance seems harmless, but the hands of the little girl in it reveal something that makes people shudder. In a quiet room at the Boston Historical Archives, Professor David Richardson carefully arranged old photographs on a dark wooden table. Each one was a window into America's past. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, tinting the sepia photographs that had just arrived from the Peton family auction with a golden hue. Among the dozens of family portraits commonly seen in the early 20th century, one immediately caught his eye. Not because of any odd details that immediately stood out, but because it was so perfect. The portrait, taken in 1904, showed a girl of about 12 or 13, sitting in an elaborately carved Victorian chair, with a hand-painted country backdrop behind her. She wore a pure white dress, trimmed with soft lace. Her black hair was curled and let down in elaborate curls, a popular hairstyle for the children of the wealthy. Her face was gentle. Her eyes were large and black, but she looked straight at the viewer with a gaze that made her heart sink. Every detail exudes opulence and innocence. The expensive fabric, the expert photography, the upright posture in the chair, the feet placed neatly on the velvet pedestal. An impeccable work. Maria, the research assistant, had noted as she arranged the photographs, the Peton family made their fortune in textiles. This is probably Miss Adelaide. Indeed, the faint inscription on the back of the photograph confirmed Adelaide Peton, age 12, October 15th, 1904. Our little angel. The handwriting was soft, perhaps that of a mother cherishing the moment. But as David began to enter the daughter into the archive, he noticed something strange. It wasn't the eyes, nor the unusually upright posture. It was the hands. They were placed neatly in his lap, clasped together as if guided by someone. Children in old photos are often awkward, struggling to maintain their poses because of the long exposure time. But Adelaide is different. She sits still as if it is instinct. There is something unnatural about that serenity. David takes out his specialized magnifying glass, a familiar tool for the 15 years he has spent searching for hidden traces in thousands of old photos. He adjusts the table lamp, shining it directly on the white gloves Adelaide is wearing. At first glance, everything is still up to standard. Smooth cotton gloves, small pearl buttons on the wrist, delicate seams. Products only wealthy families can own. But the closer David looks, the more unusual he sees. The right glove fits neatly on the hand, but the left one has a slight bulge on the palm, and fingers as if something hidden inside is making the fabric stretch. The difference is so subtle it is difficult to detect with the naked eye. But under the magnifying lens, it becomes obvious. Strange, he whispers. Throughout his career, he had become accustomed to the standards of aristocratic portraiture, where everything was perfectly tailored. The Petons would certainly not allow this kind of mistake. David took out his digital camera, attached a macro lens, and began to record the details of every stitch, every crease in the gloves. And as he zoomed in other details, things that had not been obvious at first began to appear. Adelaide's left glove not only looked bulky, but also had dark marks near the wrist, as if it were dirt or stains that had been there for a long time. Under the magnifying glass, the unusual pattern was clear, not like traces of time or humidity, but as if it had been there since the photo was taken. David had seen such stains on old clothes, often left by substances that were hard to name. But to be sure, it would take more than a blurry photo. He turned his gaze back to Adelaide's face. It seemed calm at first, but the longer he looked, the more he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. That smile, it seemed forced. Those eyes with a distant coldness. Something you wouldn't expect from a 12-year-old girl. There was something calculating in that look, as if Adelaide knew secrets that the camera lens couldn't capture. A feeling of unease clung to David. He decided to find out more about the Peton family and his daughter. The Boston Historical Library's genealogical archives were filled with records of prominent families. And sure enough, the Peton name was everywhere: newspapers, social directories, public records. The inscriptions confirmed his prediction. Harrison Peton built a textile empire running hundreds of factories and mills across New England. The family lived in a mansion on Beacon Hill, attended most of the major dinners and cultural events. Zelena Peton was hailed as the philanthropist, regularly hosting charity parties for Boston's elite. Adelaide, the only child, was born in 1892. She was just 12 when the photo was taken, but the more David flipped through the old newspapers, the more he felt a chill. In the months surrounding the photo, the Peton family name had appeared in a series of disturbing news stories. Maria, look at this. He called to his assistant, spreading out several microfilm slides on the table. 3 incidents all centered around this family in just half a year. First, in September 1904, exactly 3 weeks before Adelaide sat down in her studio chair, the governess, Catherine Walsh, died in Peton House. The newspapers described it as a fall from the stairs, a tragic accident. Catherine had been with the family for only 2 years, considered a relative. Just a month later, in November, a neighbor's dog was found mysteriously dead in the Peton garden. Then, in December, a young stable boy named Thomas was found drowned in the Charles River. 3 deaths in 4 months, Maria said quietly. It's a lot for one family, even in those days of poor safety and health. David nodded, his face darkening. Look at the time. The governess died on September 24th. So when Adelaide was photographed on October 15th, she had lost the person closest to her only 3 weeks earlier. Why was there no sadness in her eyes, but a coldness? The report of Catherine Walsh's death was brief, but enough to sow suspicion. She had been found early that morning, lying motionless at the foot of the grand staircase. Her body showed no signs of illness. And strangely enough, she had no reason to be there since Catherine's bedroom was on the same floor as Adelaide's study and nursery. David dug deeper into the Boston Public Library's old newspaper archives. Hours of microfilming took him back to the fall of 1904, where the small print painted a grim picture. Catherine Walsh, just 23. A well-educated young woman from a decent middle-class family. She left New York to take a job as Adelaide's governess, feeding her with literature, music, and the trappings of upper-class society. But then David found private letters from Catherine to her sister in New York just weeks before her fatal fall down the stairs. And in each line, there was something disturbing. The letters, preserved in family papers and later donated to the Historical Society, revealed a reality far removed from Adelaide's perfect appearance. In a letter dated 10th September 1904, just 2 weeks before her death, Catherine Walsh wrote to her sister, "Adelaide is becoming more and more difficult to manage. She seems to take pleasure in defying my every command and is beginning to exhibit behavior which makes me very anxious for a child of her age and class. I have tried to discuss it with Mrs. Beaton, but she does not seem to admit that her daughter needs to be disciplined." Just 8 days later, in a letter dated September 18th, Catherine recounted a chilling tale. "Yesterday, Adelaide deliberately broke her mother's favorite vase, then calmly blamed a maid. When I told her that lying was unacceptable, she looked at me with such coldness that I was actually frightened. There was something in her eyes that went beyond mere mischief." The final letter, written on September 22nd, just 2 days before Catherine's death, was desperate. "I cannot stay any longer. Adelaide has threatened me in ways I dare not put on paper. I fear for my safety if I continue to defy her. Tomorrow I will speak to Mr. Beaton and resign immediately." But that conversation never happened. Catherine died before she could say goodbye. David's spine turned cold reading this. If Adelaide had known the governess's intentions, then motive and opportunity had converged right there in that house. When the photo was enlarged with specialized image analysis, software-hidden details emerged. The stain on the left glove was not caused by chemicals or time. It had a distinctive shape consistent with a blood sample that had been wiped away, but still had a residual stain. In the black and white photo, the blood appeared as a faint light patch on the white fabric. "It's unbelievable," David exclaimed as he and Maria looked at the screen. "Look at the stains around the palm and fingers. It's like someone had blood on their hands before putting on the gloves, and the bulky left hand now took on a completely different meaning. Under magnification, there was clearly a bandage or wrapping inside the glove. Perhaps Adelaide had injured her hand and the glove was just to cover it up. When comparing the date of the photo with the time of Catherine's death, a creepy coincidence emerged. The photograph was taken on October 15th, 1904, 3 weeks after Catherine Walsh's death. Just enough time for the minor wounds to begin to heal, but they still needed to be covered. But how could a 12-year-old boy take down a grown woman? Maria asked quietly. David wondered the same thing, and he had a theory. He found the architectural drawings of Peyton House, the grand curving marble staircase. If someone had pushed or even made Catherine lose her balance at the top of the stairs, the fall would have been fatal. And remember, Catherine had been found early in the morning, meaning it had happened at night while the rest of the house was asleep. Perfect timing for someone familiar with every nook and cranny of the house to strike without being seen. And Adelaide's bedroom was right at the top of that staircase. All it would take was a conversation, a threat, a fight in the night. Motive, timing, approach, it all matched. The deeper David dug, the more he uncovered a long-standing thread of unease. Adelaide wasn't just suspected of Catherine's death, the files revealed anomalies that extended back to her childhood. When she was 8, Adelaide had another governess, Miss Emily Richardson. She left the Peaton home abruptly after an unexplained misunderstanding. But in a letter to the employment agency, Emily had written clearly, "The child has an unusual, fearful temperament. She shouldn't be left alone with animals or with younger children." The letter, carefully preserved in the agency's files and only much later passed to the Historical Society, was not the kind of document one expected to find in a child's record. In it, Miss Richardson, the governess, described incidents that had unsettled her so deeply, she feared they might one day be forgotten or ignored. She wrote of young Adelaide, discovered in quiet corners of the estate, tormenting insects and small animals, not with childish curiosity, but with a lingering delight in their suffering. The tone of the account was unmistakable. The child seemed to enjoy pain, and when the governess dared to intervene, Adelaide's eyes grew cold. She did not apologize. She did not weep. Instead, she threatened Richardson cryptic promises of consequences should she ever tell her parents. David, in his slow and careful investigation, uncovered more. Reports of Adelaide at the glittering parties held in the Pimpton mansion, where mothers began quietly and without explanation to keep the children away. There had been too many small accidents, too many children returning with bruises, scratches or frightened tears after games that seemed to go wrong only when Adelaide was near. Each incident brushed away as mere roughness, the kind of tumbles children often suffer. But when laid side by side, the pattern was chilling. And then the neighbor's dog, its body discovered in the Peaton garden, poisoned only weeks after Catherine Walsh's death. No source of the poison was ever found. But now, in light of Adelaide's secret cruelty, the pieces aligned with dreadful neatness. As David told Maria in the candlelit study where they reviewed their growing pile of evidence she was practicing. First, the smallest creatures, then larger ones, and then humans. Even in modern psychology, he explained, such a progression is recognized. The drowning of Thomas, the kind-hearted servant, seemed far less accidental through this lens. Employed in the stables, known for his tenderness toward horses and stray cats, he might have seen too much. Perhaps he confronted her. Perhaps he threatened to tell. His body had been found with bruises that drowning alone could not explain. He had been struck or pushed before the water claimed him, and the place of his death. A bridge near the Peaton estate, one Adelaide would have known well from her family walks. It seemed to David that Harrison and Elelena Peaton, Adelaide's parents, had chosen blindness. Or worse, that they had actively polished the surface of their family name while burying the rot beneath. After each tragedy, Harrison's donations flowed generously to civic causes. The police fund the coroner's office budget. A coincidence or an investment in silence? Even Elelena's own diary betrayed the secret she tried so desperately to clothe. In September 1904, just after Catherine Walsh's death, she wrote, "Adelaide requires careful management. We must ensure that her special nature is channeled properly. Outsiders must not mistake her unique temperament." And 2 months later, when Miss Richardson had been dismissed, the governess was unsuitable. Adelaide is happier now. We must be careful whom we employ. They must understand her needs and not attempt to stifle her natural inclinations. David, staring long at the faded ink, realized the truth of the portrait commissioned that same autumn. Adelaide posed in silk and lace, her expression painted with innocence. But the photograph was no mere keepsake, it was theatre. A public mask carefully staged, meant to whisper to Boston society, "Look here, she is nothing but a sweet, well-raised child." And yet, behind the soft light of the studio, Adelaide's shadow had already lengthened. And so, dear listener, I wonder, when you look at old photographs, do you ever pause to ask what has been hidden just outside the frame? The white dress was no accident. In that carefully staged portrait, the gown gleamed with a purity meant to whisper innocence, while the elaborate studio setting spoke of wealth and refinement. Adelaide's serene expression was intended to reassure anyone who gazed upon the image. Here was a perfectly normal child, raised in comfort and love. And yet, one detail betrayed the illusion: the gloves. Most children of the time were photographed bare-handed, small fingers, posed naturally unhidden. But Adelaide had insisted on covering hers. To the photographer, it would have seemed a trivial matter of fashion, or perhaps a nervous quirk. He could not have known that those gloves were not adornment, but concealment. Evidence hidden in plain sight. David's examination of the portrait revealed something few would notice. At first glance, the placement of Adelaide's hands, the measured angle of her face, the slight curve of her mouth. She had not been posed, she had posed herself. At 12 years old, she was already shaping her own public mask. The records of Hartwell Studio, the most prestigious in Boston, confirmed this chilling impression. They kept meticulous notes about each client, and Adelaide's session on October 15th, 1904, stood apart. The photographer had written, "Subject displayed unusual composure and control for a child. Insisted on wearing gloves despite recommendation otherwise. Directed her own posture. Showed remarkable patience during long exposures." But his private journal, discovered much later in the archives of the Boston Photography Historical Society, was more disturbing still. "The Peton child unnerved me. She sat in silence, eyes fixed upon me, as if studying whether I was a danger to her. Behind her youth was something else, an intelligence that did not feel young at all. I found myself unsettled, almost watched. Adelaide had peppered him with questions, not about smiles or poses, but about chemicals. Plates, the strange alchemy that turned glass and silver into frozen memory. Could a plate capture what the eye did not see? Could it reveal something hidden, something unintended? The photographer thought her curiosity eccentric. David understood its true meaning. Adelaide feared her crimes might leave shadows on the plates, traces of her secret acts. Her gloves had been a barrier, a shield. But a century later, under enhanced analysis, the faintest stains and injuries still whispered through. Evidence she could not have imagined would endure. And her parents, Harrison and Elelana, had been exacting in their instructions. Angelic, innocent. Multiple costumes prepared. Every thread chosen to project an image of purity. The white dress above all was meant to sanctify her. But the photographer had noticed something strange, the way the parents whispered, exchanged quick glances, as though burdened by a fear that went far beyond the nerves of parents wanting their child's best likeness. Then David found the final, most haunting testimony, not from an outsider but from Catherine Walsh herself. Among the belongings returned to her family was a diary. Its pages, written in her careful hand, told of the weeks before her death. Each entry was a step deeper into dread. Adelaide grows bold. She warns me that those who interfere with her plans suffer accidents. She speaks it with a certainty that chills me. I believe she means it. Catherine described how Adelaide drove servants away. Whispers threats, quiet cruelties designed to unravel their nerves. To the household, she appeared a polite child. To those alone with her, she was something else entirely. And then the final entry. She knows I intend to leave. She says she cannot permit me to spread lies. She has promised that tomorrow, when the house sleeps, she and I will speak of my future. I am frightened. Yet I cannot leave the others defenseless. I will try one last time to help her, to draw her back from the darkness. David, reading those words more than a century later, understood the weight of Catherine's sacrifice. She had faced the child's threat, knowing what it might cost her. She stayed not for herself, but to shield others. Her final act was not escape, but protection. And perhaps, dear listener, as you hear these words in the quiet of night, you wonder too. When a child learns to wear masks so young, what darkness might already lie behind them? The truth at last had been coaxed from the silence of time. Catherine Walsh, the young governess, who had given her life out of duty and compassion, was no tragic accident victim. She had been a quiet hero, and the evidence hidden in Adelaide's portrait revealed the final chapter of her story. The faint stains on the gloves, yes, they were hers. Catherine's blood carried from that terrible night at the top of the marble staircase, and the swelling beneath the glove wounds. Adelaide had earned in the struggle when she struck or pushed the woman who dared defy her. The photograph, once meant to preserve innocence, had instead preserved guilt. Adelaide's careful pose, her serene expression, her mask had not fooled the march of time. What her family's wealth and silence had concealed in 1904, modern forensic light, now laid bare. David reached out to Detective Raymond Kelly of Boston's Cold Case Unit. There would be no trial after 120 years, but Kelly saw in this portrait something extraordinary proof that the past is never as silent as it seems. Even in photographs, the dead may whisper their truths. Word spread quickly. The Boston Historical Society mounted an exhibition, its title, Chilling and Poetic. Hidden in plain sight, crime and photography in early America. At its heart hung Adelaide's portrait, not as a family keepsake, but as a piece of evidence. Crowds came, police historians, students, and the curious public. And among them, Catherine Walsh's great niece, Patricia. Standing before the image, Patricia's voice trembled as she spoke. Our family never believed it was an accident. Catherine was strong, careful. She did not simply fall, but in 1904, a governess's life weighed less than the reputation of a wealthy household. And so, her truth was buried. Until now, for the first time in over a century, Catherine's story was believed. Her words, preserved in her diary, were displayed beside Adelaide's portrait and the enhanced photographs that revealed the faint stains of blood. Visitors followed the timeline. The warnings ignored, the cruelty disguised. The final night when courage met, cruelty upon the marble steps. Detective Kelly began to use the case as a lesson for young officers. Adelaide Petton represents one of the earliest documented cases of juvenile psychopathy, he told them. her ability to manipulate to escalate her cruelty from insects to humans, to maintain a mask of innocence. These are patterns we still confront today. David's research carried the story further, and the revelations were grim. Adelaide had not stopped with Catherine. She had lived a long life, 2 marriages, a circle of friends and relatives, and in her shadow trailed whispers of mysterious deaths, car crashes, sudden illnesses, accidents that in hindsight seemed less accidental. She died in 1978 at the age of 86, her mask never slipping in public, her crimes buried with her. And yet, the portrait remained. Today it hangs in the Boston Historical Society. Visitors stand before it in uneasy silence, gazing into the eyes of a 12-year-old girl who had already taken a life and would continue to take others. Some linger longer, studying the faint smile, the gloved hands, the stillness of her pose. Perhaps they wonder, as you may be wondering now, how many secrets lie waiting hidden in plain sight in photographs we think we understand. David published his findings in the Journal of Forensic History, and Adelaide's case became a landmark proof that even when justice is delayed, the truth has a way of finding light. And so the portrait once meant to sanctify innocence has become something else entirely. A reminder that history has shadows, that masks do not last forever, and that sometimes, even a century later, the past still looks back at us,